Fear disguised is one of the most powerful forces shaping your life. Not because it screams at you, but because it whispers in a voice that sounds reasonable, intelligent, responsible, and calm. And that's why it's so hard to recognize. Because it doesn't arrive as panic or terror. It arrives as logic, as careful thinking, as being realistic. And if you're listening to this right now, there's a strong chance that some of the decisions you believe were made thoughtfully, safely, even wisely, were actually made to avoid discomfort, uncertainty, or the possibility of failure. And that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human because fear rarely shows up honestly. It adapts, it learns your language, it studies your values, and then it uses them against you. Most people think fear looks like hesitation, like anxiety, like obvious doubt. But the most dangerous fear doesn't feel emotional at all. It feels intellectual. It sounds like, I should wait until I'm more prepared. This isn't the right time. I need more information. I can't risk stability. I have responsibilities. It's not practical. And every one of those statements can be true on the surface. Which is what makes fear so convincing. Because fear doesn't lie outright. It selectively tells the truth in a way that keeps you safe and stuck at the same time. And when you don't understand that, you start trusting the wrong voice inside your head. Fear disguised as logic is subtle because it doesn't tell you to stop completely. It tells you to delay, to postpone, to optimize, to wait for better conditions. And waiting feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like self-control. But over time, waiting turns into avoidance. And avoidance slowly reshapes your life, not dramatically, but quietly. Through the paths you don't take, the conversations you don't have, the risks you don't allow yourself to consider, until one day you look back and realize your life was shaped more by what you avoided than by what you pursued. What makes this even more complicated is that modern life rewards fear disguised as logic. Society praises caution, consistency, predictability, and while those qualities are not bad, they become dangerous when they are used to silence intuition, curiosity, and growth. Because intuition doesn't speak in spreadsheets, growth doesn't come with guarantees. And curiosity often pulls you toward uncertainty, and fear knows this, so it positions itself as the responsible adult in your mind. The voice that says, don't be foolish, don't be naive, don't disrupt what's working. And when that voice speaks, it often drowns out the quieter one that asks, what if? Who could I become? What am I capable of if I try? The reason fear hides behind logic is simple. If it showed itself honestly, you would challenge it. You would say, yes, I'm scared, but I want more. Yes, this is uncomfortable, but I'm willing to grow. So fear adapts. It becomes strategic. It dresses itself in intelligence. It uses your past. Experiences, your disappointments, your failures, your responsibilities as evidence. It builds a case, and that case sounds airtight, especially when you're tired, overwhelmed, or uncertain. Because in those moments, certainty feels like relief, and fear offers certainty in exchange for stagnation. Think about how many times you've talked yourself out of something you wanted by calling it unrealistic, unnecessary, or too risky. Think about how many times you've said maybe later without ever defining when later is. Think about how many dreams you quietly downsized so they would feel safer, more acceptable, more achievable. And notice how none of those decisions felt like fear at the time. They felt like good judgment. But judgment without courage becomes limitation. And that's the trap, because fear disguised as logic doesn't just stop you from making big leaps. It slowly trains you to distrust your own desire for more. Over time, this creates an internal split. One part of you knows there is more potential, more depth, more possibility, while another part constantly shuts that voice down with reasons, explanations, rationalizations, and that inner conflict is exhausting, because you're not just living your life, you're constantly negotiating with yourself. Constantly justifying why you're staying where you are, constantly suppressing the part of you that wants to expand. And suppression takes energy. It drains you. It creates that feeling of being tired, even when you're not doing much, because your energy isn't being used to build, it's being used to contain. Fear disguised as logic also feeds on comparison. It points to other people and says, see, they failed, they struggled, they burned out. Better to stay where you are. And again, this sounds reasonable, because failure is real, struggle is real, risk has consequences. But fear only shows you one side of the story. It never shows you the cost of not trying, the cost of staying small, the cost of living a life that is technically safe but internally unfulfilling. And that cost is harder to quantify. It doesn't show up immediately. It accumulates slowly in the form of regret, restlessness, and the quiet sense that you are underusing yourself. One of the most painful realizations a person can have is not that they failed, but that they never truly tried. And fear disguised as logic is the reason so many people arrive at that realization too late. Because fear doesn't tell you never. It tells you not yet, and not yet feels harmless. But years pass inside that phrase. Potential ages inside that phrase. And by the time you question it, fear has already built a life around avoidance, routines that don't challenge you, relationships that don't push you, goals that don't scare you. And then the idea of change feels overwhelming, not because change is impossible, but because fear has been strengthening itself for years. The hardest part about confronting this kind of fear is admitting that some of the stories you've told yourself about being practical, cautious, or realistic were actually defenses. And that admission hurts, because it threatens your self-image. Nobody wants to believe they held themselves back. Nobody wants to admit they chose comfort over growth. But honesty is the price of freedom. Without that honesty, fear remains invisible, and invisible enemies are the hardest to fight. When you start to see fear for what it is, not as an enemy, but as a protector that has overstayed its role, everything begins to shift. Because fear originally exists to keep you alive, not to help you thrive. When you confuse survival strategies with life strategies, you end up building a life optimized for safety, not meaning. And safety without meaning eventually feels empty, no matter how logical it looks on paper. This doesn't mean you should ignore logic. It means you should question whose logic you're following. Is it the logic of growth or the logic of avoidance? Is it informed by curiosity or controlled by fear? Because true logic doesn't shut down possibility. It evaluates it honestly. It considers both risk and reward, while fear disguised as logic only highlights risk and minimizes reward. It narrows your vision until staying put feels like the only sensible option. The shift begins when you notice the patterns, when you catch yourself saying, I can't because, and ask, is that truly impossible or just uncomfortable? When you hear yourself saying, I should be grateful, and ask, grateful, yes, but am I also fulfilled? When you say it's not the right time and ask, will it ever be if I keep waiting for certainty? And these questions don't require you to act immediately. They require you to become aware. Because awareness weakens fear's disguise. It exposes the emotional motivation behind the logical argument. Growth always requires stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty always triggers fear. But fear doesn't have to be eliminated, it has to be understood. Because when you understand fear, you stop letting it drive. You let it sit in the passenger seat, acknowledged but not in control. And that's when logic becomes a tool rather than a weapon against yourself. You don't need to become fearless to move forward. You need to become honest. Honest about what you want. Honest about what scares you. Honest about the difference between caution and avoidance. And that honesty will feel uncomfortable at first, because it removes the mask fear has been wearing. It forces you to see where you've been protecting yourself at the cost of growth. But that discomfort is temporary. And on the other side of it is clarity. Not perfect clarity, but enough to take the next step. And the next step is all growth ever asks for. If you're listening to this and something feels exposed, if certain memories or decisions are surfacing, if you're realizing that some of the limits in your life were self-imposed, don't turn that awareness into self-judgment. That only feeds fear in a different form. Instead, treat it as information, as the beginning of a recalibration, because you didn't do anything wrong. You did what you knew how to do at the time, and now you know more. Fear disguised as logic loses its power when you stop taking it at face value, when you pause and ask, what am I really afraid of here? And am I willing to let that fear decide my future? Because the truth is, fear will always have an argument. There will always be reasons to stay where you are. But there will never be a moment when growth feels completely safe. And waiting for that moment is the surest way to stay exactly the same. As we come to the end of this message, I want to speak to the part of you that feels torn between comfort and possibility, between safety and expansion. That part doesn't need pressure, it needs courage. Quiet courage, the kind that shows up in small decisions, in honest reflections, in choosing growth, even when fear presents a very convincing case against it. And that is what this channel is here to support. If this message resonated, if it helped you recognize a voice you've been listening to without questioning, stay connected to Daily Upgrade Motivation. Because this space exists to help you see clearly, choose intentionally, and upgrade your life from the inside out. One insight, one challenge, one honest step at a time. And remember, fear will always try to sound logical, but your growth begins the moment you stop letting it make your decisions.